Hello my friends and welcome back. Thank you very much for being with me again today. Do you remember the Azov Battalion, Azov Regiment, the so-called neo-Nazis and all that? Remember those? Okay, the ones that were encircled in Azovstal, Mariupol, and then the bosses were released, were swapped, and I think in a weasel move, Russia made a weasel move, swapping those bosses of Azov regiment. I will tell you why. The guys in charge, the commanders. But if you're familiar with that group, now listen to this. The Russians kept saying that Azov battalion, it's a Nazi, neo-Nazi battalion with this and that. They denied, the Ukrainians denied, Azov battalion was incorporated in the National Guard of Ukraine, in the defense structure of the state of Ukraine. So they're part of the Ukrainian military in a way. Not in a way, in many ways. So they're not a private company or anything like that. They fall under the jurisdiction of the Ukrainian state defense ministry. So the Ukrainians said no. If you look in the past 8 years, you find a lot of information on these guys, a lot of speeches. They don't hide anything about their ideology and who they like and who they don't like and why. So you can make a point, a very good, very strong point, that these guys have certain kind of ideas. Okay, with that being said, the Americans said, no, we don't support Nazis. We don't support Nazis, don't support them. And by the way, Azov battalion is not a Nazi, neo-Nazi thing. Okay, now, the defense budget of the United States of America excludes Azov Regiment from any funding. Why is that? I don't think they like them very much. Specifically. So let's see what's going on. So this article comes from Sputnik, Russian media outlet, so be careful. So, you know what I mean, put your lens, certain kind of lens. If I have an article from the Ukrainians, put a certain kind of lens. If I have an article from the Russian side, put a different kind of lens. Or maybe kind of the same, because they are gonna lie, more or less. So pick the information, read between the lines. U.S. defense budget promises no funding for notorious Azov regiment. Now what? See, for instance, you know here that this is a Russian outlet because he said notorious. If he would have let the notorious out, would be objective. Now they gave you a bad connotation. All right, if it would be a Ukrainian article, it would be promise no funding for fantastic Azov regiment or courageous or something like that. Easy picks. Congress is rushing through another tranche of aid to Ukraine in its 1.7 trillion omnibus spending package, with some $44.9 billion in assistance to Kiev tacked on to the legislation. The bill includes a curious proviso prohibiting U.S. support for a Ukrainian ultra-right fighting force. Whether it's worth the paper it's written on is another story. So, whether it's worth the paper it's written on is another story. Okay, I just put the wrong accent here, or emphasis. The Ukrainian military's notorious neo-Nazi linked Azov Regiment will be formally barred from enjoying any of the tens of billions of dollars in U.S. taxpayers' dollars earmarked for Ukraine in 2023, according to the text of a draft spending bill which includes the U.S. defense budget and foreign aid. And I'm quoting, Section 8138 prohibits the use of funds to provide arms, training or other assistance to the Azov battalion, end quote, reads an explanatory note in the defense section of the bill. And I'm quoting again, none of the funds made available by this act may be used to provide arms, training or other assistance to the Azov battalion, end quote. The bill itself reads. The provisions are probably worthless. Yeah, I think so. Just above them, a stipulation reads that, and I'm quoting, none of the funds appropriated or otherwise made available by this or any other act shall be obliged or expanded by the United States government to excuse United States control over, to exercise United States control over any oil resources in Iraq or Syria, end quote. And yet the US and its Kurdish allies have been systematically looting Syria's oil resources for years on end with no signs of any plans to stop these illegal activities. So basically they say this and then they do that. Well, we know that, right? It's not clear how the, and I'm quoting, no funding for Azov, end quote, could even be enforced, since the Azov Regiment, which is part of the Ukrainian National Guard, is spread out across the country's entire military, often serving as punitive or blocking detachment fighters to shoot retreating troops or deserters, and for cleansing, quote-unquote, operations against pro-Russian activists, civilians, and officials in recaptured areas. Well, this paragraph has a lot of, lenses that you need to switch and see which one you're going to use. You got that, right? Prior to the escalation of the 8-year-old Donbas crisis into a full-blown military confrontation between Ukraine and Russia, between the United States and Russia, this February, Western media and intergovernmental organizations occasionally reported on Ukraine's neo-Nazi problem, end quote, and even the war crimes carried out by Azov militants in Donbas. However, as the conflict escalated this year, articles on the prickly subject trickled to a halt, with Western media attempting to rebrand Azov as a softer right-wing militia, questioning whether they are neo-Nazis or, in the case of one tragicomical piece by CNN accusing Russia of exploiting Azov's quote-unquote neo-Nazi history, end quote, for propaganda purposes. Some outlets have even sought to play up Azov as heroes, with the Jerusalem Post penning a glowing report this week titled "Ukraine's Azov Regiment visits Israel. Mariupol is our Masada," a reference to the Jewish-Roman War of 73-74 Common Era. The no funding, if you know what Masada is, I made a video on that when I was talking about the courage. I think I might have deleted that because some people did not like it. Not you, some better than us. You know what I mean? So I said, oh, okay, fuck you. I'm taking it out, I think it was. But I made a comparison between Masada and another event in the Second World War, where Masada, where those, I think that's the one that the Jews were on the top of that mountain and they killed everybody. They committed mass suicide, so the Roman army could not get him up. And I compared that with something that happened in Adolf Hitler's bunker in 1945, when some other guy, Goebbels, and his family did, something that is looked as in a certain way, because they didn't want to get in the Soviet Union's army's hands. So they killed their children, the 5 children. Magda Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, committed suicide and so on for that. And all that was called cowardness and criminal because they killed, but because the Jews did that on the top of the mountain in Masada, is called a heroic, even though they did the same thing. They killed their children, their wives, they poisoned themselves or something like that. So the Romans would not come and fuck them up. But hey, it seems like, sacrifice and courage, it depends who does it. But it's unfortunate you have to go to that location, to that point. Anyway, the no funding for Azov reference is a leftover from an older legislation, as evidenced by its reference to the militia as a battalion. The group has since grown into a regiment. In 2015, the now late Democratic Congressman John Conyers of Michigan put forward an amendment banning U.S. support for the militia, when the Conyers amendment subsequently tackled on the annual defense budget. Too late. They're gonna find something, and even if they do it, remember when they funded the Contras? What was it? Reagan? You remember that one? No, we don't fund. We don't fund terrorists. They was doing with Contras. Oh, right. And it was just one of the many that are documented when they did. That's just we're not going to fund you. We're going to fund the Ukrainian military, and the Ukrainian military will fund a non-profit something, or is they going to fund this and that, and then from there goes to these guys. Please, I mean, or they're going to just use the Azov regiment will use the Ukrainian military's equipment. Who's going to know? The Russians? And if they're going to know, they're going to say, and everybody's going to say, no, you're the bad dude. We don't believe anything that you say, and we're the good dude. So yes, 100% certain. That is not going to happen, but at least for our eyes, it's just see. But on the other hand, why don't they fund those guys? It's because you know what you know, because you think that people know and will be too obvious. If you don't think that those guys are not what other people say they are, and they say they are, or at least their ideas are kind of, you know what I mean, together, then why do you feel like not funding them? And then again, go back to the Russians. When the Russians encircled Azovstal and got those commanders and, I don't know, 2,400 and some prisoners they got from the Azovstal steel mill or whatever that is, factory. If you really believed and thought, and you have the evidence that Azov battalion, regiment, is a neo this battalion, when you captured the leaders, the commanders, why do you exchange them? You said very, very clearly at the beginning that those guys will be that's what I said the Russians. Those from the Azov battalion, regiment, they are criminals, they are this or that, they should be all not even put in front of a trial or anything. Nothing. And all of a sudden you give them back, so you get back something. They exchange them with, I think it was that guy, I can't remember his name, but anyway, that little weasel, millionaire Ukrainian, Russian, I can remember his name. Anyway, it didn't matter who that was, but your principle, that's when Kadyrov was very upset about it. I said, how is this possible? And besides, he or his army, the Kadyrovites, they took place and they sacrificed for taking those guys prisoners, and then you just release them for this weasel. I was very upset with that. Not because of the Russians or that. Ignore the names, ignore the parties. But if you say those guys are criminals and you let them go, for what? For a friend or something? Nah. And besides, to capture those, how many people died? It's like a slap on your beak, just like that. It was a bad move. So again, if you consider them to be neo-Nazis, you exchange them. Now if you consider them not being neo-Nazis, the Americans I'm talking about, you don't fund them. That means you consider them something that should not be funded. But anyway, they tell you, but then you're not supposed to think about these things or something. Thank you very much for being with me again today. No money for you. They will get the money, directly and indirectly. Stay strong, stay smart, look for the truth, and be just.